This week on London Real, we have the 5-time TED Talk speaker and expert in powerful speaking and conscious listening, Julian Treasure.
I describe myself now as a sound evangelist. Physiologically, sound changes our bodies all the time, right up to brainwaves, in fact, which have been shown to be entrained by external sounds.
You said politicians should do a bit more listening.
Yeah, they go for talks. Why don't they go for listens? Well, I have to say that talking at TED about talking is putting your head above the parapet, big time. People are starting to design for all the senses, not just the eyes. I don't think there are that many people running big businesses who can't communicate and can't inspire people.
On Sunday, London Real presents Julian Treasure, Sound Business.
These things are never asleep.
One of the huge perks about doing what I do for a living is I get a private mentoring session every single week in a subject that I probably know little about. And this week's subject is sound. What is the sound of your business, of your brand? Do you know? Had you ever even thought about it? Is it designed? Well, it's probably something that you should think about and you should design. And to be honest, after this conversation that I had with Julian Treasure, we've decided to redesign our entire sound experience for London Real, including how you're hearing this sound, our brand sound, the sound of our trailer, the sound of everything. And so he really made me think a lot. Julian's a fascinating guy. He is big on listening, communicating. He has 5 TED Talks. That's big one, capital TED. There's no X on the end. He's been watched over 30 million times. Amazing lectures, amazing ideas. And he actually goes in and consults for big businesses about their sound in mega malls, all these things that we just don't think of when you go into a space and you're like, I don't like it in here. This coffee shop is so loud that I don't want to meet you there. I don't want to go to this restaurant. I don't want to go to this hotel bar in London because I can't hear myself think. I have that reaction all the time, but I never think about why or what the business could do to redesign it. And so Julian is all about that. He's also all about how we can adjust our voice to communicate better. And it's true that people with lower voices are trusted more and are thought to be more important. And the classic one is James Earl Jones. This is CNN. And so he talks about that too. Fascinating stuff. He also walks me through some voice warm-ups that I now use before every single episode. And you'll see me in there with him, but one of them goes, ew-wee. And I do that now in the studio. I do it outside the studio. It freaks Julian out. But that's just one of many ways to warm up your voice, warm up your jaw. And if you're interested in public speaking, this is the talk for you. He goes through that. How do you practice for giving a talk about talking to the greatest talkers in the world? And that's what he does when he goes to these TED conferences where Bill Gates and Al Gore are in the front row. So fascinating stuff. I think you're going to love Julian. Take some notes here and think about it in your personal life, the way you communicate with people. Do you actually listen to people? Or do you wait for them to stop talking so you can talk? And do you use your voice in a very creative way to make people think about tonal voices, timbre, cadence, all that good stuff is in here. So super big. If you're ever going to give a TED Talk yourself, you can learn a lot from Julian Treasure. I love how he talks in a real way and it doesn't feel like he's performing to you. So there you go. If you're watching this, there's a good chance that you're on London Real Academy. And a lot of people have been asking me, Brian, what's this academy all about? Well, it's a bit of a secret, but it's 1,000 of the hardest core London Reelers from around the world, and we are in a secret tribe together. And what we do is we push ourselves to become better versions of ourselves. We set goals. We make sure that we maintain those goals and achieve them. And if not, we're accountable for it. We've got premium content. We all watch episodes live together. We have a private Facebook group. We have a private activity feed. We have meetups here at the studio. We've had one in San Francisco, Amsterdam, Atlanta, and Toronto, I think this week alone. So it's an incredible place to just take it one step further, take all this knowledge and talk about it afterwards. You might want to talk about this episode. Well, it can all be done at the Academy. So go check it out. And I actually made a little short video about it. And here it is.
The entrepreneurial journey, it can be a lonely road. I push myself in so many areas, but you know, you can't do it all yourself.
The thing about the academy is, it's like, look, you have the ideas, you have the ability, you have the skill, and you have the sort of ambition for yourself. But when you have a group of people pulling you forward, it's so important.
Accountability is what's missing from most of the programs or any gurus or any internet mentor that I had before.
I wanted to get some accountability. I wanted to make myself accountable to a group, to you.
The reason we started the Academy is because I felt like we were doing these amazing talks, like we'd have a Peter Sage episode or a Dan Pena episode or a Kala or someone, and you get super inspired, and then YouTube stops, and then you go back to your life and you don't make any changes. And it was just like, it felt like, what are we doing? If you're designing your life right, the good times are now. And in a few years, you'll look back and say, wow, that was amazing.
The thing about the Academy is it has so many different sort of layers to it. I think your web seminars are awesome. The way you broke it down and the style of your teaching is pretty awesome.
I like the feed. When I have to motivate myself, I kind of look at others struggling and getting over those struggles. So I actually follow daily the feed.
Best feature would be the sort of Facebook aspect of it, the social media aspect of it, as in creating a profile with your goals, your dreams.
Everyone's on the same vibe, and we may be at different stages in our journeys, but everyone's on the same page at the end of the day. Everyone's really trying to push themselves and building the best you. It really resonates with me.
And the fact that I'm committing a small amount of money and the fact that I'm actually trying to interact with those people means that I'm invested and means that I will keep it for the long run.
You have to be serious about yourself and what you want to achieve. And if you're serious about yourself, this is going to be such a fantastic platform.
London Real, sponsored by Bulletproof.
This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is Julian Treasure, who is an international public speaker on the effective use of sound in business and on personal communication skills, including conscious listening and powerful speaking. Your 5 TED Talks have been viewed over 30 million times, and your latest is in the top 25 TED Talks of all time. You are the author of the book Sound Business, and your company, The Sound Agency, works with major brands worldwide. Julian, welcome to London Real.
Thank you so much, Brian. What a great introduction. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm told I'm good at those. I might use that as a side business in the future.
You could.
You know, I used to live in New York City on Avenue A and Houston Street. And I was on like the 12th floor. And I just remember one thing about that flat, and it was the constant sirens that would go throughout the night and throughout the day. And when you live in New York City, I think you kind of have this this unwritten rule that you have to deal with kind of the sound. And I was kind of getting ready for this show today, and I was training yesterday at Gymbox here, and I was listening to a podcast, and I couldn't hear it because of all the sound that was playing in that gym. And then my final epiphany was when I got home, my 11-year-old daughter said, if the music's too loud, you're too old. So what do we do? What do I do with all of these observations and of sound? Are they correct? Are they incorrect? Because this is the world you live in.
Well, it is. The first thing is listen. You know, most people go around not listening very much. So sound is around us all the time. It affects us profoundly. And we can talk about the ways it affects us. And yet most people are not very conscious of it. And there's a richness out there, and there's a world to enjoy. It's a new sense almost, because we are so used to suppressing sound, largely because we're surrounded by noise in most places. Definition of noise, just unwanted sound, pretty much. And that's a personal thing.
Right.
Your music might be my noise. My music might be your noise. Very often that is the case. And probably your 11-year-old daughter's music is your noise. So, I mean, it's sad to hear her say that, because, you know, kids are really endangering their hearing at the moment. I think it's becoming an epidemic of, you know, not listening and really brutalizing our ears to a degree. I mean, you mentioned several things there. Cities. Every city has its song, and they vary. New York, I remember going there when I was 15 years old, many, many years ago, and lying in bed at night with the sirens out in the streets and going, this is Kojak for real, you know. It was fantastic. It was so romantic and exciting and vibrant. London didn't have those sirens at that time. We had da, 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 da going on. Right. Now, of course, it's the same. So a city's song can be pretty intimidating at street level. I see little birds on walk, don't walk signs in New York singing their hearts out, and I feel very sorry for them, because you can't hear them over the top of 80 decibels of street thunder. But you go up 10 or 20 floors and it suddenly becomes something that's strangely beautiful. And many people fall in love with those songs, and they feel very uncomfortable if you take them out to the countryside where it's silent at night and there isn't this heartbeat keeping them happy.
Right, so the noise in cities isn't necessarily a bad thing.
No, it depends how far away from it you are. It depends on the intensity of it. It depends what you're trying to do as well. This is quite a personal thing. So if you're trying to work, for example, and you're at street level and there's a jackhammer going in the street, you know, that's very difficult, obviously. And I'm constantly amazed. I watch people have conversations in streets right next to road drills, and I think, why don't you just move to somewhere where you can actually talk? And that's what we do. We tend to just discount it. But if one is conscious, you know, I said in one of my TED Talks, there's a great exercise, which is savoring sound around us. And there's beauty in cities as well as ugliness for the eyes and for the ears. So it's worth listening. You can pick out wonderful things, and you can steer away from the things that really aren't doing you any good.
It seems like we don't realize the amount of sound that we are making ourselves subject to. I know you've done some recordings where you're in a coffee shop, and like it seems like they've added reflection everywhere. It seems like people are yelling just to hear each other, and yet no one seems to just stand up and say, isn't this just madness here? Shouldn't we have a place that's aesthetically pleasing, have nice food, and yet the sound seems to get forgotten so many times. I've been to great restaurants in London where it's very hard to hear who I'm with. I've been to, you know, great bars and nightclubs where I have to leave because there's no conversation. Why have we gone that way? I mean, you know, we're smart beings. Why do we forget sound?
Well, it's because we've gone a bit deaf. We really have. We've stopped paying attention. For many years now, architects and interior designers have focused entirely or almost entirely on the eyes. Very few buildings are designed to sound good. They're designed to look good. And unfortunately, the modern trend is for hard surfaces. So they love steel and stone and, you know, glass, and it's all hard. There's very little absorbency in most rooms. So yes, you go into a coffee shop. You know, we have the theatre of coffee now, thanks to Starbucks some years ago. Well, it's preferable to when I grew up in London. If you went into a cafe and asked for a coffee, you'd get a scoop of powder in a cup and then some hot water on top of it. You know, we knew how to make tea in this country, but not coffee. Well, that's changed, thanks to Starbucks. On the other hand, we have to listen to coffee being made everywhere, not just in cafes, but also in restaurants, where for some reason they have the coffee machine in the restaurant space instead of in the back room. And I trust them to make proper coffee. I don't have to see it and hear it being made. So there is a lot of noise, and these places tend to be boxes. They're hard, and the noise reverberates around. And so you and I end up shouting from a foot away at each other, trying to make each other heard. And it's very difficult. Zagat is rating New York restaurants now by noise, which is a good thing. I remember last time I was in New York, and New York's not the noisiest city in the world, but it's a good example.
Yeah.
I took my fiance to Joe Allen's. It was a restaurant my dad took me to when I first went there, and a classic hamburger place. It's the bar where one for my baby and one more for the road was written. It's a classic place. We walked in there on a Friday night. I have never encountered such a wall of noise. It must have been 100 decibels in there. I mean, screaming at somebody from 6 inches away into their ear was the only way to communicate. Now, if you're 16 or 17 and you're in a club, that's heaven, isn't it? Because you and I don't want to have to make a whole evening's worth of witty conversation when we ask somebody out for the first time. That's,
Yeah, and some people are drawn to those places so they don't have to make conversation.
Exactly. So the younger you are and the more gauche and less, confident and so forth, the more that works. But so often I sit in hotel lobbies where people are trying to do one of two things. They're either trying to talk or trying to work. And there's pounding music going on and terrible acoustics and everybody's shouting. And I just think this is not fit for purpose. Somebody designed this without thinking what people are actually trying to do in the space. So I think my third TED Talk really was all about this, and it was called Designing with Our Ears. And that's really something we need to do. Do you know, in the old days, people used to do that a lot. The old master masons, they understood the way buildings sounded. If you went back to castles in those days, they had huge tapestries up, not to look good, but to damp the acoustics of the room down. That's why those things were there. Otherwise, the whole place would reverberate. It was all stone. You get cathedrals, which are designed to sound huge as you enter them, and then get more and more intimate sounding as you approach the altar. So they knew what they were dealing with in those days, and we've kind of lost it somewhere along the way. So the idea of oral architecture is only now being rediscovered. There are some great books on it out now, and I hope it's going to become a thing. We need a little bolt-on package for AutoCAD, the package all the architects use to design. We need something there that says, how's that going to sound? So they can put headphones, like, oh no, better not do that one.
Right. Most people don't understand how sound affects them, and I know you, I'm going to probably ask for little bits of some of your TED Talks, and one time you've talked about 4 ways that sound does affect us, because our ears are always on, aren't they? And I know I choose with my eyes now not to look at certain things. I'm really choosy about not to watch the news. I don't want to look at the advertisement with the model and the beard on it, but with my ears, I don't get that choice. And what are some of the things people can kind of be aware of how sound is affecting them?
Well, the 4 ways sound affects us, they're very powerful. And as you absolutely rightly say, we have no earlids. So the ears are working all the time. Even while you sleep, your ears are working. If there's a strange sound in your house while you're asleep, you will wake up. So these things are never asleep. So the first way sound affects us is physiologically. So if I do that, that's a little shot of cortisol, fight-flight hormone. It accelerates the heartbeat. Your hormones are causing fatty acids to enter your bloodstream. You're ready to fight or to flee, and you're not going to do either of those two things. So it's not very good for us.
Okay.
So physiologically, sound changes our bodies all the time, right up to brainwaves, in fact, which have been shown to be entrained by external sound. So if you have a speaker, they've done tests on this, a good speaker in a room will have everybody's brainwaves entrained with his brainwaves or her brainwaves by the end of the talk.
Okay.
Second way is psychologically, moods, emotions. And that's obvious. You just think of music. I love that scene from Bridget Jones where she's sitting there with a tub of ice cream playing All By Myself by Eric Carmen in floods of tears. We can use music to amplify a mood like that, or we can put on a jolly tune to cheer us up when we're feeling low. So we use music to change moods. Birdsong is good for mood as well, we've found. We use it a lot in the sound agency, in offices particularly, because it makes people feel secure. It tends to be when the birds are singing, we're safe. We've learned that over a long time.
Is that something we've picked up over the last 100,000 years?
Yeah.
Even animals know that, right?
Totally. Birds have been here much, much longer than we have.
Right.
They've been here for millions of years, and we've been only around for a few 100,000. So we've grown up to birds. And you and I know when the birds are singing, normally that's a good sign. If they suddenly stop, that's not good. That means something pretty bad is about to happen. It's also nature's alarm clock bird song. So, anybody who's been to an all-night party knows that moment when the birds start singing is when the guilt kicks in. Oh, I really shouldn't be here now. So we know it's time to be awake when the birds are singing. Third way sound affects us is cognitively. Nobody can understand 2 people talking at the same time. So office noise is extremely distracting if you're trying to concentrate. Now, the open plan office, and we can talk about this in more detail a little bit later on, is pervasive. I mean, it's becoming one size fits all for all offices, and that's so wrong. I'm doing a talk next week, actually, at a conference which is being run by Professor Jeremy Myerson, who's a guy I really respect in this field. And he's distinguished 3 forms of working. Collaboration, for which open plan is great. And, if you want to shout across, the rule is interrupt me, it's fine, we're all kind of loose here, and move around and, Brian, could you come and have a look at this? Yeah, sure, that kind of thing. Great. Concentration, rubbish. Open plan is rubbish for that. Shut up, I'm trying to think, I'm trying to write something here. We all know that feeling of somebody talking next to us, taking up one of our 1.6 human conversations that we can understand.
That's what it is, 1.6, never 2. Some people think they can do 2.
Well, there may be a very few people on the planet, but I've never met one. I don't know if you have.
No, I've never done it.
Women are better than men because the research shows their brains work side to side more, so they're using both hemispheres simultaneously, whereas we tend to use front to back a lot more, men. So men particularly find it difficult, but I don't think there are many people who can understand 2. And certainly my estimate is 1.6 to 1.8 human conversations. So there's somebody talking here. I have no earlids. I am pre-programmed to decode language. It's inevitable. I can't not listen to words in my language anyway. So he's taking up, or she's taking up, one of my 1.6. I'm left with 0.6 for the little voice in my head, which is the one I'm trying to listen to when I'm writing or doing maths or whatever it may be.
Okay. So that's concentration, bad for concentration.
Really. And the other form of working that Myerson distinguishes is contemplation, which is a kind of decompress. It's after you've had heavy meetings. You need somewhere to sit and think or be quiet, or maybe be social. So it could be a social space, or it could be a Zen type space. Either way, open plan is not the answer for that either.
Okay.
So open plan offices, the biggest number I've found in terms of estimating the reduction in productivity from open plan is 2/3 reduction, 2/3 reduction.
Because of that open plan?
Because people are trying to do, concentrating work in an environment that's designed for something completely different.
Yeah, let me just talk about my quick open plan experience, and then I want to get to the 4th part. When I moved to New York City, I was 22 years old, and I went to the 33rd floor of Bankers Trust Plaza, which was just south of the World Trade Center when it was still there. We actually used to look right on it because it was across the street. And I was on a trading floor that felt to me the size of a football field with 300 people on there. And we each had a meter of space. And this was my introduction to the professional world. And it was mind-blowing, crazy, stressful, built that way, I think, because collaboration. We all needed to hear and see each other, where the markets were going, what was doing that. But there was no downtime.
No.
And I continued this in my last 10 years at the city. When I was at ICAP, I had 10 years of the same thing. And I mean, not to be graphic, but I could see these people, I could smell these people, I could hear all their private conversations, they could hear all of mine. I got to a point where when I'd order a coffee at Starbucks, I wouldn't want to tell people because they would hear me around me. And I'd be like, I'll have a latte. Because I was so used to keeping things quiet, because I was in this environment that, quite honestly, it was very stressful and you had to just deal with it. And so it worked for one thing, but it didn't work for a few other things.
Totally. And privacy works both ways. I mean, now we're into offices, we might as well carry on if you're happy to.
Jump in there.
Because it's a really, really big topic. Privacy can be affected both ways. In that situation, you had a lot of noise, and a noisy office is dangerous. It's actually bad for people to work in 65 decibels or more day after day. It creates stress hormones and people become sick, physically sick. It also reduces helpfulness, it reduces sociability, and it is incredibly fatiguing. At the other end of the spectrum, if you have a pin quiet office, which many offices are, you get open plan offices with a finance department working away where the turning of a piece of paper is a major event in the office, shh, you get that kind of reaction. Well, you've got 20 people in there. If one person takes a phone call, they're putting off all 19 other people immediately because everybody can hear that phone call perfectly. Very intimidating for the person on the phone and very off-putting for everybody else. So we do need some noise in open plan if we're trying to work in that situation. We need some masking sound. I tend to prefer nature sound of some kind, because we're very good at setting aside stochastic sound, which would be like gentle rainfall or gentle water flowing. Okay. Something gentle like that. Bird song is good. Stochastic means composed of many, many random events which create a kind of pleasing wash So the difference between one bird singing outside your window would drive you mad. The dawn chorus is beautiful. One dripping tap, terrible. Gentle rain on leaves outside the window, everybody loves that one.
Okay.
So we can mask sound, we can create privacy in offices as long as the noise level isn't too high. Then you get somewhere between 45 and 55 decibels is about the sweet spot to work in. Now I'd imagine your office was probably way louder than that.
Yeah.
And I've just dealt with actually a bunch of lawyers in a trading firm, which shall remain nameless, in New York, a very big one. I did some training for them on listening. They work in effectively a trading floor. So they're doing half-hour legal conversations where they're giving people advice on the phone. People are saying, here's the big problem, what do we do? And they're sat next to other guys doing the same thing on a huge floor, which is set up actually for the whole screaming trading match. Totally inappropriate for what they're trying to do.
Yeah. All right, we digressed on the open plan.
Sure.
But you went back to the fourth point of sound,
The
right?
fourth one is behavioral.
Okay.
Yeah, sound changes the way we behave. So we maybe unconsciously, very often will move away from unpleasant sound. We do have some sort of self-preservation instinct in this. I know I was talking about people next to, drills in the street. And the other one, here in London, if you're on Waterloo Station in the Bakerloo line, as the trains come in, they come around a big bend and train wheels don't bend. So there's this absolutely hideous screeching sound as they come in.
What are the decibels on some of those?
That's like 110 decibels, a piercing shriek.
Yeah.
And I do this, and I look up and down the platform, and I'm amazed that everybody else is just reading their book, standing there. This is really killing their ears. So we tend to ignore things. Having said that, if we can move away, we will. If it's a sustained bad sound. And this is the thing retailers are just starting to understand now, with the sound agencies working with big shopping malls all over Europe, just about to start working with a very big retailer in America to improve the sound of shopping. Because what happens if you make bad sound in a shop is people leave. Not instantly, but sooner than they would. Because, here we are trying to go shopping and we're in this hideous cacophony. It's not pleasant for us. And we just think, I'm tired. No, I'm going to go home. So we leave. And retailers know there's an equation here. Increased dwell time, they call it, how long we stay in a shop, you increase sales. There's an old adage, if you hang around a barber long enough, you get a haircut. So,
I'm reminded of going to the store Abercrombie & Fitch about 5 years ago when they came to London, which was sensory overload. They used to spray the perfume all over the clothes, and I actually could smell it. It was right behind the Royal Academy for like a block away. I'd be like Abercrombie. And when I went in there, and yes, I was in my 30s at the time, I'm too old, but it was so loud that I couldn't dwell in there very long.
No.
But I guess for a younger demographic, it was novel.
I respect what they do.
Right.
Both them and Hollister, and now Superdry, they're doing the same thing, which is creating an ambience that attracts a certain type of person. They don't want me in there. They don't want you in there. We don't want old people making it look ugly in there.
Of course.
So, my 17-year-old daughter would go into one of those places and I'll sit in the chairs they very nicely provide outside for the oldies to sit in, and then dive in with a credit card at the end and pay. Now, I respect that completely. That's intelligent use of sound to filter, to select, to attract a certain sector of the population. Sadly, what we experience most of the time, if you think of a place like Marks and Spencer's, which is there for everybody, pretty much everybody, and they're playing pop music, and I can't understand that. It's fast-paced, the loudspeakers are not good, it's speeding people up, excuse me. It's speeding people up and they're therefore leaving faster. And many people don't like, about a third of the people in shops, the research has shown, really dislike piped music.
Yeah,
So,
I'm one of them.
Yeah, they will tend to leave.
Yeah, the sound experience is so important. Even in the tube the other day, I'm looking at these speakers inside the tube that I'm sure weren't designed for the decibel levels. And
No.
the person's talking to me, and I know the tube is probably a little bit slower on the user experience than some other places, but in so many places, that sound could be thought of. And it just is not, as you said, especially in tech design, it's all been the visual experience the last 10 or 20 years, right?
Which is weird, right? I mean, the internet is an audiovisual medium, last time I looked.
But they say in filmmaking, God waits for sound. And so I've had the best cinematographers in the world on the side will tell me, but the sound has to be good, or nothing I do is good. So they admit that sound design is important, but yet most people forget it.
Yeah, totally. I think sound tends to take up like 2 to 5% of a film's budget. Right. It's tiny. We're getting feature films now made for $150 million. Sound will be a tiny fraction of that. And yet any filmmaker will tell you it's more than half the emotional impact.
Oh yeah, there was the Robert Redford movie where he was on a boat in the middle of the ocean, and they filmed this whole thing. It's just him and the boat, right? It's a whole journey that he goes through. And I remember reading that they didn't take any ambient sound. It was all created in the studio later, and with all of these, non-expecting pieces created all out of thin air to create that emotion. And it's fascinating to know that none of it was water and wind, all something else.
Yeah, it's an art form that, and of course it's got even bigger in gaming.
Right. Oh, because that's.
I mean, if you unroll a game, it's many, many, many hundreds of times longer than a feature film. And I know sound designers who've designed, 10,000 sound effects for a game. So there's a huge amount of really careful sound design going into these things now.
You're a specialist in, in the idea of sound, how it makes us feel, and that's why I was a little surprised at your last TED Talk, your most popular one, where it is titled "How to Speak So That People Want to Listen," and it was a very interesting transition where you went from almost that sound to that human connection. And I know it's been your most popular talk, probably 9 million views, soon to be more. Why did you go there, and why was it so well received? 10-minute talk.
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? I have one of the slides I show sometimes when I'm training people is a slide of yin and yang. And, yin being the yielding, the dark, the feminine, the moon, and passive and receiving. Yang being the male, hot, white energy, and more kind of out there. And if you replace those two words with listen and tell, I think you get some idea of the way our culture is focused at the moment. And we're much more into telling than we are into listening. So it didn't surprise me that the TED Talk on speaking is about 5 times as popular as my TED Talk on conscious listening is. That's about the kind of balance. I mean, it's a rough barometer, but that's about the kind of balance I think we have in society generally, which is a bit of a shame. And, certainly it's very important to be able to speak powerfully. And in that talk, I was talking about this wonderful instrument that we all use, the human voice, which very few people think about. We don't train kids how to use it, more so in the States than we do here. I know, American kids do a lot more public speaking than we do here. But, the joys of prosody and intonation and of register and of pace and pitch, and these kind of things, we barely touch on these things at school. This is an instrument we just are expected to pick up and learn how to play on our own.
When you went through those things you just described in your talk, I didn't know that they were named that. I hadn't heard of prosody. Yet I knew exactly what you were talking about right away.
Prosody is fantastic. I mean, I adore it.
What is that? So people
well, prosody is the sing-song of language. So if I speak in a monotone, absolutely on one note, then it becomes incredibly tedious, and that's where the word monotonous comes from, monotone, one note. So we need it to give our speaking emotion. And it varies from culture to culture. If you know...
Rio de Janeiro is almost like a song.
Oh, it would be. I love Brazilian prosody. And then if you go to Scandinavia, for example, you'll get people saying, we're very excited about this. It's extremely exciting. And they have a much more restrained prosody that's got certain cadences that work there. So it varies culture to culture. It varies individual to individual. Some Latin cultures are enormously vibrant. I think I regret one thing that's happening in the world at the moment, which is the kind of invasion of what's called high-rising terminal. It's a very repetitive prosody where everything's said as if it were a question.
Okay. Is that a British thing or global?
It came from originally Australia, and then it went into Los Angeles, and then through Miley Cyrus and all those kids' TV programs who will speak like this, I'm like this, and he's like this.
Okay. You get the Valley Girl?
It's the Valley Girl speak. Okay. And unfortunately, that became enormously popular, so now it's really become very prevalent. And, 2 reasons why I regret it. I'm not saying it's bad or wrong, but it's slightly regrettable, I think. One, it's repetitive. So it robs us of the richness of prosody, which I think is such a glorious song. And the second is, it's also slightly weak, because what's in there is a hidden question, is that okay? So when I'm doing this, I'm asking you, is this okay? Every statement, I really want to go to the pub tonight. And it's kind of...
Yeah, you're asking permission.
Begging permission, yeah. And as opposed to, I want to go to the pub tonight, which is a completely different... we can say the way we say things is enormously influential. You think about the way you say no when somebody's tickling you compared to the way you say no when a kid steps out in the road. We can really change the meaning of what we say with the way that we say it, and it's worth paying attention to that.
Other ones you mentioned were register, timbre, pace, pitch, volume. Most people understand the pace, I guess the pitch. Register and timbre, what are those referred to?
Well, there are 4 registers that you can speak in. Now, I can't do the top one, which is called, I've forgotten what it's called now. I'll come back to it. Mariah Carey can do it. It's very, very, very high indeed.
Okay.
Then down below that, you've got falsetto register, which is this one. Again, not terribly useful if you're trying to speak powerfully to somebody. It'll remind people of Monty Python. He's a very naughty boy. You know, that's register. It's used by a lot of singers. If you think about Coldplay or many, many bands, they sing in falsetto register, so it's popular for that.
And it obviously hits us with certain emotions when we hear it.
Yeah, it is used by quite a lot of elderly ladies. Hello, dear. How are you? You know, speaking here. It's very soft and very unthreatening register to speak in. Then you've got the modal register, which is where most of our speaking comes from. And we can move our voice in the modal register, so it's very powerful to learn how to do that, to move from the nose voice or the head voice up here or the throat voice here, and then move down into the chest voice here, which resonates. Now, this is a big resonating chamber. Again, these things are cultural, but there's an effect because we tend to vote for politicians with deeper voices, research has shown.
That's a fact. Okay.
That's a fact.
Right.
There's been quite a lot of double-blind studies now done, which show ceteris paribus. I mean, it's not the only thing in play. Nevertheless, if you're like this, we tend to go for the one with a deeper voice because we associate deeper voices with authority and power. Right. Because big things are deeper, like elephants have a deep voice, mice have a very high voice.
I'm thinking of the classic James Earl Jones, "This is CNN."
Yeah,
or, you know, or
exactly.
Darth Vader, right?
Yeah, Darth Vader would. Yeah, absolutely. Or in a world, you know, this kind of deep voice is taken to be authoritative. So if you want to speak powerfully, it's worth practicing coming down here a little bit.
But in your TED Talks, you don't do that intentionally.
No.
Okay,
No,
I noticed that.
I use my regular voice, although, you know, it is something I've worked on over the years, so I probably speak more from down here than once I did. Once upon a time, I was probably more up here like this, you know, now it's probably more down here. Okay. And then there's another register, which again is a thing I rather regret coming into common parlance a lot now. It's called vocal fry, and it sounds like this, you know, we're really stoked about this. And again, very much a West Coast way of
American, right.
And you get largely females. I mean, I did hear a man yesterday. I was at a restaurant and there was a guy at the next table who was in this the whole time. He was just speaking like this the whole time.
You pick up everyone's voice.
Yeah, I do, unfortunately. But it's not very pleasant to listen to, and it robs, you know, the voice of all this richness and beauty, I think, that the voice has. It's also not very good for your vocal cords to speak like that.
Right, and it's being lazy, and you said, I think I heard one of your podcasts where you said it's a meme, and it's kind of lazy meme that people are just resulting to. They probably don't know they're doing it, but they're robbing themselves and everyone around them from the richness of their voice.
I think so, yeah. I think so. I mean, that's an opinion, but
right.
I'm not telling anybody how to behave. I think, you know, if you've got a voice, why not explore the fullness and richness of it? It's a shame to limit it to a tiny, tiny part of its capabilities.
Right. So you talked about all these pieces in your most famous TED Talk, and just talked about how people should use these things. And then you went into the art of listening as well.
Yeah, well, listening to me is even more important. And after all, what's the point of speaking if nobody's listening? And that is very largely the case. And I've just developed a full day course on listening, actually. It was fascinating. I started out thinking, I can't do a full day on this. And at the end, it was just like, what can I leave out? I've got to take stuff out of this. There's too much for a day. We tend to indulge in faux listening. You know, a lot of people do that because really listening is an extraordinary thing. I mean, literally extraordinary. It's not usual. For the real listener, the person speaking is the only thing that matters in the world at that point. So real listening is not, yeah, I'm listening to you. I am listening to you. Yeah, no, carry on. That's not real listening. Real listening is absolutely focused. It's conscious, because listening is an activity. We tend to think of the ears as passive. Excuse me. Because sound comes in here and we don't do anything. You know, it's not like looking where you're actually doing something.
And it's
obviously.
always on.
It's not passive. Hearing is passive. There's not much you can do about hearing. I mean, I can hear what's going on around me all the time. Listening is making meaning from sound. It's deciding what I'm going to pay attention to and what it means to me. So it's ascribing value and meaning to symbols, if you like, sonic patterns that we recognize, the most obvious of which is your name. So if somebody says Brian, you go, was that for me? Excuse me. So we use our ears all the time. Unfortunately, a lot of the time, we're very lazy about it. So we might look like we're listening. There's a lot of pretend listening that goes on. You know, somebody nodding and thinking, what am I going to have for lunch?
Yeah, when can I talk?
Exactly. There's a lot of interrupting that goes on. I get very frustrated with journalism now because I think the whole meme of attack journalism is a very sad thing. You know, there's a kind of a death dance between politicians and journalists now, where the politicians get 10 or 15 seconds before they're interrupted by the journalist. So they get their soundbite in, or you get this nonsense of, I'm very glad you asked me that question because I'm going to say something completely different now. Or, you know, it isn't normal conversation, not like this.
Right, like a news panel where everyone also is looking to jump in and cut things off.
Yeah, interrupting is just rude, actually. And it's very unfortunate that journalists have started doing this as a matter of course, actually. There's a very, very good practice people can take, if there's anybody watching this who's an interrupter, because it does become a habit. The 3-second rule is fantastic. And that is to count to 3 before you say anything.
Okay, that's after you're done, or just? Okay.
After I finish, count to 3. I mean, I'm not telling you to do it now, but for an interrupter, that's a really, really difficult thing. Sometimes they may have to start with a 1-second rule, or just breathe in before speaking. That helps because that gives that moment to pause. Then there's kind of what I call speech writing listening, which is where we look like we're listening, but actually we're composing our next brilliant, witty piece of repartee while this inconvenient noise over there is going on. So you get lots of non sequiturs if you're doing that from those kind of people. There are many, I mean, I've listed lots and lots of errors and obstacles to listening. Emotion gets in the way of listening. You know, when we're upset, I think there's actually an inverse relationship between emotion and listening, which is to say, if you're upset and I really listen to you, you'll get less upset. What I'm hearing is, I hear that you're really upset, you know, and then it tends to go into a normal conversation. If somebody's not listening, somebody can get more and more and more upset. At the same time, if you're really, really upset, it's hard to listen. It really is. We're much more interested in giving our point of view. And
yeah, I remember a couples therapist one time. I actually went to couples therapy, I think like 10 years ago, and he said, we're going to do this exercise. And this was a fascinating one. He said, your girlfriend's going to talk for a minute, and she's going to say what's bothering her. You are going to listen to it, and then you're going to talk for a minute and say what's bothering you, and then neither one of you are allowed to say anything for 24 hours.
Wow.
And I think they might have added that only thing I could say was to summarize what she said about me, and she did the same about her. So you know that they actually heard you and they said it in a way.
Active listening, yeah.
And then you actually had to sit with it for 24 hours. And,
fantastic.
Yeah, fascinating listening exercise.
Yeah, I mean, I have been in places where it's not quite listening stick, but the rule is somebody talks and then that's it. Everybody, you know, and then somebody else talks. And there's no, I don't agree with that. There's no interrupting. It's just respectful listening. And it's an amazing process to indulge in respectful listening like that.
One of the great points you made is that you said in this culture, since we know everything's being recorded, including this, that we can always come back to it later, that we just don't necessarily take the time to sit and listen. And also there's this whole immediate time frame, as in that news journalist you're talking about knows they have 30 seconds before you move on to the next YouTube clip. So it's this constant soundbite, not to mention news loves to promote bad news and aggression. Are we losing touch with our own consciousness since we're not actually taking the time to take it all in and listen the first time?
Well, to a degree, I think yes. I think listening is in danger, big time. And from technology, apart from anything else. We're becoming very impatient. We're in a multi-stream world. Now, I can't sit on a tube and read a book and listen to music at the same time, but I see people doing that all the time. And I do think the human brain is very plastic and it adapts very quickly to things. So I'm sure that kids are now able to take 3 inputs where I can't, because that's not the way I was brought up and it's not the way my brain works. I'm not sure it's a good thing. I don't know. We shall have to see. It's like the long-term effects of using mobile phones or playing rugby union or whatever. The jury's out on many of these things. We'll have to wait 10, 20, 30 years to see what the effects are on the human body of many of these things. Multiple inputs, I do think, are making us impatient and shallow. There's a great quote from Oscar Wilde. It was an insult he gave about the Marquis of somebody or other. He said his mind is like a soup dish, wide but shallow. And that is pretty much a good description, I think, of social media in many ways. The word friend doesn't quite mean what it used to. And we tend to have now a lot of shallow relationships as opposed to a few deep ones, where there's not a lot of listening going on. I'm on the train. Who cares, really? Who cares? It's personal broadcasting. So we set ourselves up as little mini TV, radio, whatever stations and broadcast our every move to our 6 followers or 6 million followers. It doesn't really matter.
I want to ask you about that headphone culture and the tube, but did we finish up with the point you kind of made in your TED Talk as far as people listening to each other, how to speak and have people listen to you?
Well, yes, and just to say the importance of listening, because it's all very well to rant about listening being in danger in the modern world, but does it matter? And I think it does, because conscious listening is the doorway to understanding. This is how we relate as human beings best. I mean, I would strongly argue that text and email are much shallower forms of communication.
To watch the rest of this fascinating interview, click on the link below and go to londonrealacademy.com. There you can sign in with your social media login and watch the rest of the episode for free, along with all of our episodes on London Real, my webinars, and all of our premium content, all located over at londonrealacademy.com. So click on the link below, you'll be directed there, and you can watch the rest of this fascinating interview, and I'll see you there.
Human voice is a very powerful and it's a great shame that we stop listening because we start being able to marginalise people. And if we can dismiss people and